Hey, Horatio.
Horatio Alger Jr. was a prolific 19th century author, best known for his many youthful novels on impoverished and humble boys, and the rise to lives of security and comfort through hard work, determination, courage, and honesty. His writings characterized the Gilded Age and had a formative effect on America at that time, while his rags to riches narrative appealed to many.
And just to start off, Caleb, I'd like to know what business it is exactly that you've been running.
Well, I run a newspaper. We're called the American Times.
Okay, and I've just heard some rumors lately about the newspaper industry, especially the American Times, and it's been seeming like you've created somewhat of a monopoly on the newspaper industry. Can you shed any light on that?
If you may know, by the New York Times, they're doing fairly well right now, and we have good competition with them. So I honestly do not believe that my business should be accused of any type of monopolistic action.
Have you looked into beginning a pool of sorts with the New York Times or any of your other competition?
Well, personally, I'm not a big fan of the pools, as, you know, where we all come together and choose a single price for our newspapers, which all of us will follow. But personally, I believe that they decrease competition, and we won't be able to freely change our prices without consulting the rest of the newspapers, and I like that freedom.
To change your price?
To change my price, yeah.
Right, okay, I understand. Since the creation of the Standard Oil Alliance back in 1882, which is essentially a trust company where shareholders can invest, and it's run by a board of directors, so it's easier to control the aspects of the business. Do you think you'll be doing anything like this with the American Times?
Well, I believe that the idea of a trust makes a very limited amount of products to be able to produce. And personally, I think it's very ineffective and will probably fail sometime soon.
Okay, all right. Not a fan of the trust.
Not a fan.
So there's also this idea of an interlocking directorate, which is essentially a board member. A board of director is working with all the different aspects of a business, but it is illegal, as you probably know, under the Sherman Antitrust Act, for a board of director to work with that company's competition. So the director is working within the company. Do you have any directors within your company that work around?
No, I don't have any directors like that, but I do see how they could be useful working with other companies that aren't in competition, obviously. I read the book Other People's Money by Louis Brandeis, and I found it very interesting, but I don't see really any in the future of the American.
And finally, I just want to ask you about horizontal and vertical integration. And as you probably know, horizontal integration is buying up your competitors. So, for example, it would be something like you buying the New York Times, and vertical integration is you buying the steps towards the supply chain. So, of course, to make a newspaper, you're going to need paper, you're going to need ink. It would be you buying the paper and ink companies so that you can kind of own everything, and the newspaper industry is all in your sphere of influence. Do you look to do anything like that with your company?
Well, no, I do not plan to buy any of my competitors like horizontal, and I feel like both horizontal and vertical integration would both begin to lead to monopolistic types of business.
First off, I'd like to start with Cornelius Vanderbilt. If you could just tell us a little bit about him and your opinions on the way he approaches business.
Well,
I find Cornelius Vanderbilt really fascinating. He grew up in Staten Island, New York with an illiterate father, and then he dropped out of school at 11 to work for his father. He used the money from landscaping to buy a sailboat, and he ferried passengers and goods across the Hudson. But when he was working for a steamboat company, he saw that they were much better than sailboats, and he bought himself a sailboat. His low rates and good services stole away many customers, and people even offered to pay him to stop. By 1840, he had a fleet of over 100 ships. Then he proceeded to buy a rail in New York, and again offered good service and low rates, stealing customers. And I hear he's expanding westward towards Chicago. He's someone I find really interesting, and I aspire to make my business as successful as his.
Next up, I'd like to talk about John D. Rockefeller and how you feel about him.
Oh, well, I think
Rockefeller actually started as an assistant bookkeeper, and at age 20, he and a business partner started a company of merchants of hay and meat, earning $450,000 in his first year. Then in 1863, Rockefeller opens the oil refinery outside of Cleveland, and then he founded the Standard Oil Company. He had a near monopoly on the oil until the recent anti-monopolistic Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 due to the negative public opinion. We all know about the recent demise of the Standard Oil Company. Regardless, Rockefeller is very successful, and he's a very hard-working worker that came from rags to riches, very much like a character in one of your books.
Again, another businessman that everyone seems to really respect. Moving on to the next peer, I'd like to talk about J.P. Morgan. How do you feel about him?
I'm not a big fan of. Personally, I'm not a big fan of JP, but
J.P. Morgan began working in his father's bank, and then in 1871 he split off to start J.P. Morgan and Company. In banking, he created an extremely powerful company, and he's even helped the U.S. government in the past. He bought Andrew Carnegie's steel company, but personally, I believe that it is becoming a monopoly, and there's a congressional investigation happening. But we'll all see how that turns out.
But moving on, let's talk about Andrew Carnegie.
oh,
Andrew Carnegie is very interesting. He immigrated from Scotland and then started working in a factory at 13. And then later he gets a job at the Pennsylvania Railroad and gains knowledge of the system. And then after he leaves, he opens his own steel company, where he creates new and innovative ways to make steel, truly shaping America in the late 1800s. Of course, there was the controversy with the Homestead Strike of 1892, where Carnegie tried to lower wages at a factory in Pennsylvania, causing riots. There's also the more hidden part of Carnegie and his philanthropy. He did many philanthropic things like the Carnegie Mellon Institute of Technology in Pittsburgh and the New York Public Library, and he even wrote an article titled The Gospel of Wealth, where he expressed his ideals on philanthropy and responsibility of those with money.